goes way back. I was in college, and Jay Adams first published his book, Competent to Counsel, and the manual. And I purchased that, and I started reading it. And as I was reading it, it struck me that this is what pastoral ministry is all about. I mean, he was basically talking about what it was really like, because I had some experience, really like dealing with people in the church. And so I actually dropped out of one class and used the entire time I would have for preparation for that class to do nothing but go through the material and try and put it into my heart and mind and how that was going to affect ministry for me going forward. Well, biblical conflict resolution is it's extremely important. Mm-hmm. I still remember once the seminary that I had gone to was traveling with a traveling class, and we were hosting at our church. And they used to ask pastors who were hosting it, just to toss us a little bone. Come on in and talk to the students. So I'm sitting there on a stool in a family life center, and the question got asked, and I had to say, I somehow made it out of seminary thinking that as long as I went into church and I was very faithful in ministry, that everything would be smooth. Now, that's partly my fault, because I never read. How do you get away from reading? Well, Ephesians, Timothy, what do you have to do there? Corinthians, whatever. I mean, I should have known better. But we never talked about it. And it was a challenge, because it was what I saw when I first came to a church all over the place. I later in life, I was dealing with a pastor who could preach wonderfully. And as he was being removed from the pulpit of his church, he said to me, I really believed that as long as I delivered a good sermon every week, everything else would take care of itself. And conflict undermined that situation. And it does it all the time. We have it all around us. I think it was Ken Sande who said, paraphrasing Christ, if you'll allow that, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there will be conflict. And if we have a good idea of what the visible church is, then we know it's a place where you have some redeemed sinners and some sinners who are yet to be redeemed, and they're all together. And when you put a bunch of sinners together, it's just going to happen. They're going to sin against each other. And so knowing that, preparing for that, preparing congregations for that and people for that in those times is really important for us as we carry out pastoral ministry. It's part of shepherding, and it's an important part of shepherding. Quite a few. I've seen 2 things. I remember some people visited our church when I was away in college, and they taught the church Matthew 18, 15 to 20. But the way they taught it and the way that people used it, it was like a club. And basically, if you were a very critical person in your heart and mind and spirit, people picked it up and used that to insert themselves into other people's lives and to bring, and they just created more conflict. Now, obviously, Jesus wants us to deal with conflict and resolve it, but that's certainly not a way to go about it. And then the other side, I deal all the time with people who are in congregations where the leadership themselves, for one reason or another, they don't want to address problems. They want to let them continue to, they hope, let's just protect the peace, we'll keep the peace, which often means we're not going to deal directly with the problems that exist in the church, and then they fester, and that robs them, the church, of peace as well. Getting conflict resolution wrong is usually done with a desire to help and/or to promote peace, and when you get it wrong, you don't help and you don't promote peace, you lose it. There's a second area that kind of tags in with that, and it's forgiveness. When I have in my life as a young minister to today, I've basically given 2 messages on forgiveness that are absolutely the opposite of one another. And so you could title the second one Backus versus Backus, because there are really at least 3 prominent views of forgiveness. One, in the broadly evangelical world, is very self-centered, and it's very psychologized. It's all about I need to forgive because I will feel better, I'll be healed, and et cetera, et cetera. The other view that's common is, so one, completely unbiblical. Another that's common among far more biblical churches, though, because of its proponents, is a view about forgiveness that I'd say is mostly biblical. but it's also wrong, and it leaves areas that are unresolved, like it leaves sin unresolved in churches. And then finally, there's a biblical view on forgiveness that really reflects God's treatment of us and his attitude that he calls us to have. And so getting that right is an important part of what we need to talk about. Well, I think one of the things that they'll have after they finish the class is a recognition of the wonderful opportunities that God gives to us in the midst of a conflict. I mean, I will correct impressions right now. My stomach doesn't immediately relax, and I don't immediately, when I hear about a conflict, go, oh, wonderful. But I'm really hoping that between the time I first hear about it and the time when I get to that point that shrinks. Because in conflict, there are opportunities for me, for my congregation, for the people who we're in conflict with, and there are wonderful opportunities in each one of them. You could sum it all up in opportunities to glorify God. And we ought to learn to be able to identify that and then to address conflict in a way that's going to allow us to do that. So that might be one of the first things that I'd say. It's also going to be some tools to help us identify and deal with the things in our own nature that bring more conflict around us. I sometimes joke with people and say, I teach on conflict resolution, and that's good because I leave a wake of conflict when I go someplace, and I better go fix it. I mean, it's a poor joke. It's not that funny. But it's a sense of recognition that conflict isn't just about dealing with what's out there in the congregation. It's about dealing with what's in here in my own heart. And so we need to learn how to do that as well. And that's another tool. And then tools to prepare congregations. There's a certain way that we're used to dealing with things in a church, and they vary from church to church, but we've got that pattern of life that we're running through and how we've dealt with these things in the past. Maybe we run away. There's the pastors I know that don't ever want to deal with conflict at all. They want to just avoid it where they can. That doesn't help. And so we'll give some tools to be able to prepare your congregation to identify it, and so they'll know what to expect. They'll know what the church teaches from the scripture about it, and they'll be able to incorporate it into church life, as well as what to do if it begins to escalate beyond our ability to just coach and counsel. How do we kind of move that up? What are the resources that we have? What are the alternative ways of dealing with these disputes?